It's the last weekend of the Waterpolo Champions League from Rock Sport Complex in Malta. 4 of the best waterpolo teams in Europe were battling for the title. These are this season's final highlights of the Waterpolo Champions League. What a match we saw in the first semi-final of the final tournament in Malta. The first place team in Group A, Novi Beograd, and the second place team in Group B, Barceloneta, met each other. Let us recall that the Serbs have won 5 games in 6 matches, with only 1 loss, while the Spaniards also had 5 wins, but one of them by a penalty shootout. That Živkov Gocic's team has something to say in this match was evident from the very beginning, when Vasilije Martinovic scored with an extra player in the first attack. A little later, they went 2-0 when Luka Gladovic launched a counter-attack. The Catalans waited more than 5 minutes for the first goal, and then Alberto Munarriz scored with a numerical advantage. Immediately in the next attack, a penalty kick was awarded, which was converted by Alvaro Granados. However, Bilal Gabaramasi scored a new advantage for the Belgraders with an extra player. However, after the first quarter, no one had an advantage because last season's Novi Beograd player Granados scored again from the half counter. Barceloneta took their first lead at the beginning of the second quarter through Vince Vigvari. However, that advantage didn't last long because Milos Chuk soon responded with an extra player. The Belgrade team turned things around by the end of the half because Dimitrios Skumpakis scored a nice goal to make it 5-4. Chuk ensured even a greater advantage when he converted another extra player. However, in the next attack, the great Granados responded and Barceloneta was back in the game. In fact, Elvis Fatovic's team achieved a complete turnaround. First, Bernat Sana Ausa scored to equalise with an extra player. And by the end of the third half, they took the lead with a goal by the left-handed Zoltan Burian. But Novi Beograd didn't give up. They equalised with a wonderful lob by Martinovic. The Spaniards are again in the lead when the best player of the match, Granados, scores with numerical superiority. And then the player who was perhaps least expected to do so entered the scene, Marko Dimitrijevic. When Granados scored a penalty just over 2 minutes before the end, it seemed that Barceloneta was on the verge of reaching the final. But then a turnaround occurred. First, Miroslav Perkovic scored with an extra player. And then 42 seconds before the end, Skumpakis brought Novi Beograd the final with a great goal from outside. Or did he? Gocic calls a timeout 20 seconds before the end, and it looked like the team would keep the ball until the end of the game. But Chuk clumsily lost the ball, and Burian scored a second before the end to make it 10-10. Shots from the 5 metres were decisive. The shooters were in a great mood and they didn't give the goalkeepers any chances. The goalkeepers were substituted on both sides, but in the first 4 series all players were accurate. And then came the decisive one, the 5th. Unai Biel Lara's shot was saved by Milan Glusac, and Chuk scored on the other side and turned from a tragic figure into a hero. Novi Beograd is in the Champions League final for the 3rd time, while Barceloneta remained on 1 title. In the second semi-final, the defending champion Ferencváros and this season's pleasant surprise, Marseille, met for the 2nd place in the final. The Fradi was first in his quarter-final group with 5 wins and only 1 loss, and that one on penalties. Marseille won the 2nd place in Group A with 5 wins, one of which after the 5-metre shootout, and only 1 defeat. The Hungarians entered the match as favourites, and it was evident from the very beginning. Stalianos Agriopoulos put them in the lead after just 1 minute of play, after a quick goal from an extra player. Dusan Mandic took care of increasing the lead with a real bomb from the outside position. A minute later, it's already 3-0. This time, the scorer was Vendel Vigvari with an extra player. Marseille waited 6 minutes for the first goal, and then Andrea Perlanovic scored with numerical superiority. But the better game of Balázs team continued. The 4th goal was scored by Marton Vamos. And the 5th by Christian Manhertz with an extra player. By the end of the first quarter, the 5-time Champions League winner Perlanovic scored once more with a numerical superiority. The French came a little closer when Mikhail Bodega was precise from the post. But in the next attack, Eduardo Di Soma brought the lead back to +3 with a very nice goal from outside. The Hungarians finished the first half in style. They scored 2 goals in a row, and for 8-4, Zilard Jancic was precise from the half counter-attack. It seemed that this was it, that Ferencváros would easily qualify for another final. But in the second half, Marseille showed that they did not come to Malta for tourism. After a long period of goallessness in the 3rd quarter, Roman Marian Vernu scored for a glimmer of hope. That hope became even greater when the French champions scored 2 goals in a row. First, Bodega from the central position. And then captain Ugo Krusiliat scored for just -2 with an extra player. Vamos returned the Fradi to calmer waters with an extra player. But Toma Vernu took care of the more uncertain last quarter, 3 seconds before the end. And then did the real drama begin. Perlanovic immediately lowered the score to just -1 with a foul shot at the beginning. And a real madness broke out on the swimming pool when Bodega, with an extra player, brought Marseille's first equaliser. But then Ferencváros showed their top quality. In the next attack, Mandic returned the lead with a bomb with a numerical advantage. Another extra player was scored by Eric Molnar, who had the ball fortunately bounce off Vermosh's shot. Toma Werner made sure that the game gained additional momentum. He scored with an extra player. However, there was no real drama in the end. Miguel de Toro made sure that with an extra player. And Adam Nagy, whose goal for 14-11 definitely turned the game around. The score didn't change until the end. Ferencváros has a chance to win its third European title in history, while Marseille can achieve its greatest success with a bronze medal, since it is the first participation in the Final Four tournament. The third place match challenged water polo players from Barceloneta and Marseille. As a reminder, the Spaniards were defeated by Novi Beograd in the semi-finals after a penalty shootout, while Marseille lost somewhat more convincingly to Ferencváros. Although it was expected that Milos Štěpáňovic's team would be somewhat more motivated, given that they have not yet won a medal in the Champions League, the opposite happened. Barceloneta entered the match fantastically and dominated from the first minute. This especially applies to Álvaro Granados, who scored his team's first 2 goals. The first from a counter-attack after intercepting the ball, and the second after a foul shot. Marseille scored its first goal through Roman Marion Vernu with an extra player. However, by the end of the first quarter, Elvis Fatovic's team had already gained a significant advantage. First, the French defence fell asleep at the goal of Biel Gomila, and then Granados also realised a shot from 5 metres. Complete dominance of the Spanish champion in the second quarter as well. With a score of 7-3, they scored as many as 4 goals in a row. The series started through Martin Ferreira with an outside projectile, and ended only at the beginning of the third quarter when Toma Werner scored from outside. But the match was already decided by then, because it was a goal for 11-4. After Andrea Perlanovic's goal for 13-7, the Catalans once again entered the series. This time they scored as many as 6 goals in a row. The series was opened by Alberto Munariz, and concluded by none other than Granados with another goal with an extra player for a huge 19-7. Marseille's 8-minute goalless period was broken by Vernu, and the final score was 19-9, set by Alexandre Bouet from a half counter-attack 2 minutes before the end. The Spaniards were led by the brilliant Granados with 6 goals, and the most effective in the French ranks was Vernou with 3. This is the 3rd bronze medal for Barceloneta from the final tournaments, along with 1 title, and Marseille, although they were left without a medal, achieved their best results so far with 4th place. On Sunday evening, it was time for the most important match of the entire season. In the grand final, Novi Beograd and Ferencváros. The Serbs were better than Barceloneta after a penalty shootout, while the Hungarians defeated Marseille somewhat more easily. It was an extremely important match, and this was evident in the opening minutes, as there were no goals from either side for the first 5 minutes. That was broken by Christian Manhertz, who converted an extra player for the Fradi's initial lead. However, in the next attack, the Belgrade team also responded through Nikola Lukic, also with an extra player. The same player brought the first lead to Živkov Gocic's team a little later. But the Greens didn't remain in debt, and they responded through Gergo Fekete. Lukic was in great spirits, and by the end of the first quarter, this young player had scored his 3rd goal. Dusan Mandic made sure that no one went into the break with the lead. The new leader for the defending champions was brought by the brilliant Manhertz, who scored after a counter-foul. In the first half, neither team managed to break away to a 2-goal lead, so Lukic equalised with another goal with an extra player. A little later, the Hungarians were leading again, and the scorer was Eduardo Di Somma, this time with 2 extra players. However, the score was tied at half-time, and Dimitrios Skumpakis made sure of that with an extra player. Interestingly, there were no more goals in almost 5 minutes remaining until the end of the second quarter. The 3rd one therefore proved to be crucial, although it started better for Novi Beograd, who took the lead with 7-6 with 2 new goals from the 6-time scorer Lukic. But then Ferencváros played their best minutes in this final 4 and practically decided the match with 4 goals in a row. First with an extra player, and a goal without looking, the phenomenal Manhertz equalised. Two minutes later, the same player, again with numerical superiority, turned the score around. Then Fekete launched a counter-attack and scored for a +2. That was not the end of the Hungarian superiority. because soon Zalad Jancic also led his team into calm waters with a bomb from an outside position. Miroslav Perkovic offered some hope to the Serbs, who in the last attack turned his player and scored for 10-8. But Manhertz took care of the new advantage of 3 goals with a goal after a half counter. Novi Beograd came back once again through Vasilije Martinovic with an extra player immediately in the next attack. Marton Varmos returned to the new +3 with a nice goal assisted by Manhertz. On the other side, Angelos Vlahopoulos retaliated. If there were any, all doubts about the winner were resolved by the best player of the match, Manhertz, who scored his 6th goal from the left wing. The final result of the match was set by Martinovic with an extra player in the last minute. Ferencváros, Novi Beograd, 13-11. The players from Budapest defended their European title and won their 3rd crown in total. The Belgrade team, however, fell short once again in their 3rd final.
FTC-Telekom Waterpolo 13. With this result, Ferencváros are the winners of the European Aquatics Champions League Men Final for Malta 2025.
Ferencváros is the old and new European Waterpolo Champions League champions, the first Hungarian team to defend the title. The team led by Balázs finishes the season with only 1 loss in all competition, with an incredible record of 48 wins and 1 loss after penalties. Novi Beograd is 2nd and Barceloneta is 3rd. This season of the Champions League is officially over now. The players can turn to the World Championships in Singapore this summer. From all of us, that is all. We'll see you next season.